It's a delight and true pleasure and honor to be here again with the Asia Week, the inception of Asia Weeks in San Francisco. And I just want to echo Jay's comments about Edward, not only his vision but just sheer energy and doggedness to get such a large undertaking and just keeping people at it, because people drop off at the drop of a hat. So this afternoon, the first talk is an idea that is something that so many of us in this room deal with on a daily basis, of connoisseurship in Chinese paintings. Because whether you're a collector and you're interested in what really are the paintings that you have in your collection, whether you're a scholar and a student who is trying to figure out what are the parameters of artists' actual style, whether you're a museum curator and you need to make sure that you are not getting taken in by any fakes, or whether you're a dealer or somebody in the market who is just all about what is good, bad, and indifferent. We all need to begin really with authenticity, of looking at Chinese paintings and understanding what they really are about. Our three speakers we're so fortunate to have and I noticed that you in the handouts you have their biographies, so knowing that you can read about them, I won't go into the details. But the wonderful thing is that not only have they each been looking at paintings for more years than any of us really want to talk about, but it takes a lot of years of just looking and looking and looking to really get a foundation of what Chinese paintings is all about, but also from different, slightly nuanced point of view. So we're going to begin, and I'm going to do all the introductions up front and get them out of the way so you can hear the speakers, is first Arnold Zhang, who has come at it, I think, from a variety of angles. Traditionally, most fundamentally, according to the old Chinese system of being an artist himself, of learning how to paint and evaluate paintings as someone who wields the brush himself, and I think that has now become his main area of interest. But he has also worked in the market consulting for Sotheby's for quite a few years and was their first department head of Chinese paintings. And now he's branching out to be, he's taught for a long time, but now he's even, as he reminded me, adjunct professor at Columbia. So the big leagues, we could call them. And then after that, we have Joseph Zhang, who will bring a museum perspective, having worked at the Met, the Freer Sackler, and most recently here in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum, but also having looked at numerous paintings in private collections and other museums throughout the world. And then finally, the perhaps a pure academic approach of Rick Vinograd, who has looked at and studied paintings and taught about them to students at Stanford. So Arnold first, and thank you so much. And then we'll have questions afterwards.
I'm only going to show one slide. Welcome. Connoisseurship may be simply defined as an intimate and thorough knowledge of a given field or endeavor. It involves more than a familiarity with facts and figures, although specific knowledge is an important part, and transcends the mere appreciation of a given subject or artistic form, though appreciation is an essential element. The true connoisseur of art combines an encyclopedic knowledge of artists, styles, techniques, and specific works with a refined sensitivity to and appreciation for the more subtle aspects of the art form. The connoisseur can counter the often heard remark by non-specialists, "I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like," with a statement of his own, "Like it or not, I know what I'm looking at." Connoisseurship is the interaction of objective and subjective judgments, which, through training and practice, can result in an accurate assessment of the relative quality and value of a given work of art. Connoisseurship issues have always been central to Chinese painting studies. Questions about relative quality and, moreover, authenticity permeate the field, and arguments over these basic issues have both inspired and tainted much of the recent scholarship concerning Chinese paintings of all periods. In this brief talk, I will attempt to describe in general terms the internal process of looking at paintings and how this process is influenced by external factors, including differences in cultural background and training. Determining the relative importance or value of a given Chinese painting actually involves a range of issues. Any work of art is subject to many kinds of valuations. In the case of assigned work, for example, the identity of the artist and the importance of that artist in art historical terms, as well as the importance of this particular work in the context of the artist's complete oeuvre, are all of great significance. An unsigned work may also have art historical value because of the information it yields about a given period, school, or style of painting. The aesthetic factor, of course, is what gives art its very special value and is, above all else, what art is about. Beauty, or the perception of beauty, has an intrinsic value and is above all else what art is about. Beauty, or the perception of beauty, has an intrinsic value to the maker and to the viewer. Works of art are also subject to valuations of the market, that is, the price a collector is willing to pay to acquire them. The monetary value of a work of art adds to its importance, irrespective of its relative aesthetic or art historical value. Assessments of the art historical and economic importance of a work of art are themselves subject to developments in history and change over time. The aesthetic factor is the most subjective and culturally based. Beauty, as they say, is in the eye of the beholder. The perception of beauty is to a large extent influenced by the cultural environment in which one is raised, and takes into account aesthetic assumptions based on specific social, economic, as well as historical conditions. A person with a reasonable amount of sensitivity, however, can be taught to transcend his or her own aesthetic assumptions in order to appreciate the art of another culture or era. One of the primary functions of the art historian is to provide the cultural and historical context necessary for a fuller understanding of the art object. These criteria apply to works of art in general. In discussing Chinese painting specifically, it is necessary to identify a few criteria that are more specific to the field. The connoisseurship of Chinese painting requires a great deal of specialized knowledge and experience, and it is for this reason that many potential collectors are intimidated from entering the collecting arena. In traditional China, the ideal connoisseur was conversant with a wide range of styles, produced continuously over a period lasting many centuries, in a country of tremendous geographical size and an even greater cultural reach. He was also knowledgeable about technical issues such as materials, that is ink, paper, silk, pigment, seal paste, and formats, screen, hanging scroll, hand scroll, album, fan, folding fan. He was able to recognize and authenticate artists' and collectors' seals, and possessed a broad knowledge of ancient texts, including artists' literary works and collectors' catalogs, in order to identify the collection history or provenance of a given piece. All of this assumes a thorough knowledge of classical Chinese and the ability to read handwritten texts written in a variety of script styles, as well as the archaic script employed in carving seals. Volumes have been written about every aspect of Chinese painting connoisseurship, and it's no surprise that the great connoisseurs spent an entire lifetime mastering the skills and accumulating the knowledge required to make intelligent judgments concerning authenticity. In the brief time allotted, I will explore some of the basic methodologies and underlying attitudes that connoisseurs apply to their study of Chinese paintings. My focus will be on modes of perception and the processing of visual data, and I will limit my remarks to the basic question, how do different connoisseurs look at Chinese paintings, without addressing the other skills that they rely on, such as researching provenance, analyzing the content of inscriptions, comparing seals, etc. Admittedly, this will be an oversimplification of the field of Chinese painting studies based on my training with two of the great connoisseurs of our time, James Cahill and C.C. Wong, and my decades of practical experience watching connoisseurs at work while I was at Sotheby's and Kaikedo Gallery. I hope that my overgeneralized remarks may be helpful to the non-specialist in learning how to appreciate Chinese paintings, and may also be of some assistance even to the more sophisticated scholar or collector in bridging some of the diverse gaps that still exist in our collective assessment of individual works. In analyzing a Chinese painting, we can identify at least 5 main formal elements. 1, subject matter or theme. 2, form or structure, that is the shapes of the individual elements, such as rocks, trees, flowers, figures within a painting. 3, composition, that is the way the forms or structures are combined in the painting. 4, color when used or in tone, different in tonality. And 5, line or brushwork. Anyone who studies Chinese paintings must consider all of these elements to a greater or lesser extent. But the relative emphasis or importance one places on each different aspect and the order in which he considers each element is largely a product of the individual's training, which in turn is influenced by cultural values. In general, I can identify 2 basic approaches to the connoisseurship of Chinese painting. That of the art historian / connoisseur, generally trained in the West, or more recently in China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan using Western methodology, and that of the painter / connoisseur, almost exclusively of Chinese ethnicity and generally trained through the traditional private master-pupil relationship. In theory, connoisseurship and art history are 2 different processes. The former responsible for the authentication and critical analysis of art objects, the latter involved chiefly in the interpretation and contextualization of the authentic data. In practice, especially in our field, these 2 functions are not performed by separate individuals, but are both embodied in the person of the Chinese art scholar, who must be both art historian and connoisseur. The art historian connoisseur's job begins where the artist leaves off. He's dealing with finished works and the relationship of these works to individual painters, schools, styles, or historical eras. In analyzing the formal characteristics of a painting through a process known as structural or stylistic analysis, he tends to begin with the larger, more obvious elements, such as subject matter and composition, and works his way down to less obvious aspects, such as form and line, through a process we might describe as deconstruction. In analyzing this painting on the screen by Bada Shanren, for example, the art historian is likely to begin by noting the overall compositional thrust that sweeps across the surface in a backward C motion. He will then decompose this main compositional arc into its component forms or structures, with the large rhomboid rock form serving as a central focus from which small rounded rock forms extend in the foreground and large squarish mountain shapes ascend into the background. He might then comment on the way in which the careful placement of the trees establishes a sense of scale and relative distance from the picture plane, enabling the viewer to see the compositional movement as a recession into the distance as well as abstract surface pattern. The dynamic juxtaposition of the foreground trees in comparison with the relatively stable placement of those in the background further emphasizes the division of the composition into 2 parts. The art historian might then note that this complex image is a product of just a few lines, which necessitated that the artist execute each line perfectly in order to convincingly delineate the forms. The art historian can then relate this set of visual data to other known works by the artist to determine which similar tendencies are exhibited in those paintings. This will help him to authenticate the piece, place it in the proper chronological position within Bada Shanren's oeuvre, and determine its relative quality. He can make similar comparisons with paintings by other artists of the same period or same school to support whatever points he's trying to make. The art historian endeavors to be analytical and objective in his quest for knowledge regarding a given artist, painting, or period. He strives to be accurate, precise, and articulate in presenting his findings to others. The type of structural analysis used by art historians is based on the principles of connoisseurship developed by scholars of European art, adapted and modified by historians of all cultures and periods. Analysis of a painting begins by treating the painting as a whole, starting with the largest, most obvious compositional elements, and then systematically deconstructing or decomposing the work into finer, more subtle elements, moving from macro to micro levels. Throughout much of China's history, however, especially from the 14th century onwards, the practice of painting, as well as calligraphy, is inexorably linked with connoisseurship. While by no means mutually exclusive, these two approaches, that is the art historian connoisseur versus the painter connoisseur, represent fundamentally different attitudes about painting and can sometimes yield very different judgments of quality and authenticity. I have observed that the painter connoisseur is concerned with many of the same issues, and in analyzing a painting proceeds in much the same way, but in a more or less opposite direction or order from the art historian. In viewing the same painting, for instance, the painter connoisseur will focus his attention first on the marvelous control of broad brush strokes and ink exhibited by Bada Shagrin, paying particular attention to the way the tip of the brush is turned in depicting the contours of the mountains. He may note the balance of the dark dian, dots, and light lines, and the unusual brush strokes halfway between dots and lines that define the distant mountains and stand for trees in the middle ground. He will then concentrate on the unique shape of each of the forms, and finally describe the structural integrity of the composition as a whole. The painter tends to focus first on the finer aspects, such as the quality and character of the individual lines, then work up through the beauty and strength of the forms, and finally to the larger compositional movements, moving from micro to macro levels. To the Chinese painter, line is of primary importance, not just the use of line to accurately depict forms, but also the textural and expressive quality of the line, apart from its descriptive function. In learning to paint, the artist must first learn to draw good lines. This means mastering the two key elements of Chinese painting, bi, brush, and mo, ink, known collectively as brushwork. Only after the artist has learned the rudimentary skills of wielding brush and ink to a point where he can control them satisfactorily, a process which may take years of practice, can he tackle the more advanced notions of structure and composition. A student of landscape will begin by painting a single rock or tree, with a dual emphasis on getting the form right and creating a beautiful line. As the student progresses, he learns to depict more varied and complex forms by combining various elements such as trees, rocks, houses, waterfalls, etc. But brushwork technique is always an important consideration. The Chinese painter traditionally learns to paint by copying works of contemporary and ancient masters. The traditional Chinese connoisseur will rely on his expertise as a painter in making judgments about quality and authenticity. Whereas the art historian connoisseur relies on a process of deconstruction, as breaking down the composition into its fundamental elements, the painter connoisseur looks at paintings in a reconstructive manner. He approaches the finished work almost as if it were a blank sheet of paper, and in his mind reconstructs the painting from its small elements to large, brushwork, structure, composition, color, as if he were copying it. He retraces in his mind the wrist movements of the original artist and uses the insights gained through this tactile process to decide questions of authenticity and quality. The traditional Chinese connoisseur believes that a great artist's character will be manifested in every single stroke from his brush, and therefore each brush stroke should reveal the hand of the maker. Through repeated copying and study, he has compiled a visual vocabulary of the distinct flavor or personality of the brushwork of many different artists. He seeks to identify the subtle idiosyncrasies of an artist's gesture or touch. The art historian connoisseur looks for consistency in pictorial structure and overall compositional integrity. In each case, however, the key to success is making valid comparisons based on accurate data. Every connoisseur will compare the piece in question to other works that relate in terms of artist style, subject matter, or theme, period, region, or other criteria. For each of these categories, the connoisseur will have stored in his memory, with the aid of photographs or ideally original works, a series of models or visual templates to which the work in question will be compared. It is crucial, therefore, that the visual templates themselves are accurate representations of the categories they purport to represent. The connoisseur must constantly update his visual database as new discoveries are made and new evidence is revealed. In actual practice, there are many connoisseurs who cannot be easily categorized as either art historians or painters. Collecting is closely related to connoisseurship, and the collector, whether private or institutional, can learn a great deal about Chinese painting through the study of specific pieces over an extended period of time. In developing an eye for quality, there is no substitute for looking frequently and intensely at good paintings. Collectors may focus on narrower fields of investigation by limiting their collecting efforts to certain artists, schools, formats, or periods. It's worth noting that while a great many Chinese connoisseurs and scholars have been trained in the United States in art historical methodology and have had great success in synthesizing the Chinese and Western approaches, few, if any, non-Chinese art historians have been trained in the use of the Chinese brush and in brushwork-oriented connoisseurship. Modern universities and museums are based on the Western model, and academic degrees are granted upon completion of requisite coursework, examinations, and research papers. Teaching and curatorial positions, more often than not, are open only to those with the appropriate academic degrees. The private one-to-one tutelage that has traditionally been the method of knowledge transfer from one generation of painter connoisseurs to the next does not offer any academic degree and is therefore impractical in today's world. Moreover, connoisseurship in general has been increasingly de-emphasized in art history programs worldwide in favor of less object-oriented approaches to art. There are a great many Chinese paintings that continue to defy scholarly consensus in terms of attribution, date of execution, and relative quality. It is imperative that we continue to subject these works to critical scrutiny, employing the methods of both the painter connoisseur and the art historian connoisseur, as well as incorporating whatever new methods of analysis the scientific community can offer. Air travel, photography, publishing, and more recently digital imaging and information transfer have provided us with many more images and much more data concerning Chinese paintings in more readily accessible form than our predecessors could ever have imagined. We have the tools to elevate connoisseurship to an unprecedented level of accuracy, but in order to do so, we must match the diligence, sensitivity, and passion of our predecessors. At the same time, we should also begin to focus not just on the objects, but also on the artistic process. The best Chinese painting is more about the process of creation than about the finished objects themselves. Traditional Chinese connoisseurship is a manifestation of shared aesthetic experiences and a means by which common cultural values are transmitted. The practice of Chinese painting and the appreciation of the objects produced through this practice is designed to transcend the physical plane and to transport the viewer to a more elevated aesthetic and spiritual plane on which genuine and fake paintings are equally transitory.
Well, there may not be too much more to be said about the topic, but I'm going to talk anyway. That is my want. I had intended, I guess, by my title to elicit a certain sympathy that I had to spend my all too brief, so much of my all too brief 3.5-month summer vacation in the arduous work of looking at paintings, but knowing so many of you as I do, I think that's sympathy is probably not going to be forthcoming, so I'll just move ahead. But I did have, I want to say that, you know, I'm an academic, and, you know, our concern with connoisseurship, it doesn't have quite the same stakes as are involved for collectors or for auction house experts or dealers, or for museum curators who are represented by others on our panel. So I can sort of say anything I like, I suppose. Nothing much is at stake other than I suppose, the judgment of history in a sense. But I've had very similar kind of background, minus the practice side. I also studied with James Cahill. And our academic training was heavily connoisseurial, and it's true that it's something that's increasingly difficult to accomplish in the realm of academic art studies for various reasons, partly just trends in the field and partly just opportunities for the kinds of experience of firsthand experience of works of art that were so deeply ingrained in our training. And that brings me to my first stop, the summertime stop, which was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And as you know, this has one of the great collections of early paintings, in particular, available in the United States, along with the Met and the Nelson Atkins Museum and the Freer in Washington. And we had this wonderful opportunity through the auspices of the Mellon Foundation to run a workshop for graduate students with a week of intensive looking at early paintings in the MFA collection. And that kind of opportunity is increasingly rare, especially for early paintings. I remember when I was in graduate school studying in Taiwan at the Palace Museum with Fu Shun, who was a resident there at the time, and Zhang Jiaoshan, great names, and we would have sort of weekly seminars at the museum, and they would pull out all these great masterpieces of Song and Yuan paintings for us to examine closely. And that opportunity just can't exist anymore. I mean, it's available occasionally in exhibition formats, but to really see things out on the table or on the walls firsthand, close up, so on, for very good reasons of conservation and protection of the works of art. They're very seldom even exhibited publicly, much less available for private viewings, and that's a real barrier to the acquisition of this kind of expertise that Arnold was just speaking of, especially for early paintings. Anyway, that was the subject matter of our workshop this summer, and I want to just focus on one such work that we looked at, which has some interesting dimensions on the connoisseurial side. And this is a work which has a authorship, or an attributed authorship, to this painter Yang Shixian. And he's known in the historical records. He's supposed to have been a court painter who bridged the late Northern Song and the early Southern Song, so 12th century in date. But otherwise, he's kind of a cipher. There are no other paintings, at least none that I know of, that are survived by him or are attributed to him. He's a name in art history and a name that's attached to this painting. And you see it on the title label here, along with the attribution, or the connoisseur's seals of Wen Jia, who himself was a painter, 16th century artist, and someone involved actually in the kind of evaluation, the kind of art expert in one of his dimensions. He sort of vetted and cataloged a famous collection of his own time that belonged to the Prime Minister Yen Song. And when that collection was confiscated back by the imperial court, he was put in charge of cataloging and so on. Anyway, so he's interestingly engaged in sort of the same project we are. So it has, you can see, a certain pedigree, at least in this title label and the seals that are attached to it. And the subject matter is, of course, quite famous. It's the famous prose poem, The Red Cliff, one of two such poems by the great literary man Su Shi, who's also, of course, a painter and art theorist. So this painting presents interesting kinds of problems of attribution. And fortunately, we have some relevant comparanda, comparative material, at least relevant in terms of their dates and subject matter. So this is the opening section of this version that shows this kind of central scene of Su Shi and his companions in a boat along the waves underneath the scenery of the Red Cliff. And since we don't have other works by Yang Shixian, one kind of approach would be simply to bring forward a presumably relevant bit of comparison. And we could find that in this work, which is in the National Palace Museum. Same subject matter. This is just one section, about half of the total composition, but it's the kind of relevant section for our comparison. And it's roughly similar in date. It's a 12th century work by an artist who lived in the north and operated under the regime of the Jin, which was contemporary with the later Song or Southern Song. In the south, the period that Yang Shushan is supposed to belong to. And it has lots of points of comparison, the general composition, something of the treatment of the cliff, the sort of verticality of it, some relevance in the texturing of the strokes and so on, and we can bring this comparison together to see that. Now, so that's one kind of procedure, close comparison and close looking. The other aspects have to do with sort of quality, that side of connoisseurship, the evaluation of the sort of skill of the artist and so on. And we note, as far as we can, through the close-up details, this slightly looser treatment of the cliff structure, not quite the same kind of decisive texture strokes and so on. I'll bring forward, just because fortunately we have them, some still closer details. So this is the Boston version, Yang Shushan. It has a bit of that quality of these kind of what we call axe-cut texture strokes, you know, this sort of vocabulary of texturing forms, the same kind of roiling water, and so on. You might note the treatment of the figures as we look back again at our comparison object, this Wu Yuanzhi, very well discussed and authenticated work from the north, from the 12th century, and what seemed to be a little more skillful treatment of the figures, and also a livelier treatment of the waves and so on. And again, I'm bringing back these small details to make the comparison. So pretty close in lots of interesting ways, but certainly a more kind of regular structure in the rendering of the cliff forms, and rather more elegant and skillful treatment, I would say, of the figures. You see they're sort of faceless and so on here. Now, another kind of comparison that would be quite relevant is another 12th century artist, a very famous one, Tong, and he also bridged the northern and southern Song eras in the early 12th century. This is a work, hand scroll form, a different subject matter, but quite comparable in terms of its general appearance. It's also in the Alice Museum collection in Taiwan. And again, you get a sense of what the sort of period style is in the terms of the treatment of the, again, these kind of angular texture strokes, the patterned waves, like a fishnet pattern sometimes called. You also can see, as it happens in this detail, some evidence of repair and presumably repainting and so on. So those are important elements to take account of, maybe to filter out a little bit. They can be a little misleading if we think of them as original elements of the painting. And certainly for old paintings, there's going to be a lot of restoration and remounting and repair of that sort. And again, I should say that, you know, these are anything attributed to this period is sort of intrinsically a rare and important work, and they're the kind of things that not only are seldom exhibited, or fairly rarely exhibited, but also, of course, not the kind of thing that you're likely to encounter in the market much these days. But you might find things that have august ancient names attached to them. Now, so this is a work of some quality. This is getting back to the Yang Shushan attribution. See this big Benzone seal. It has a big apparatus, in fact, of seals and inscriptions attached to it. It's a hand scroll, horizontal scroll. So it has lots of room for that kind of attachment. And quite interestingly, it includes a very famous seal, the so-called Silian half seal, that you see here kind of pressed horizontally, which was a kind of inventory seal. Has a very famous literature attached to it. And it appears on many important early paintings that pass through imperial collections in the either depending on whose account you're reading in the late Yuan or especially in the Ming period. And the painting has, as you can see, many other seals as well, including the seal of Wenjia, the painter connoisseur from the late 16th century. And so this is a very impressive kind of apparatus. It's the kind of thing that allows a tracing of provenance over a long period of time, but it seems on closer examination that a lot of this apparatus is in fact spurious. This is Wenjia's, the tail end of his colophon or inscription attached to the painting with his signature and date, and his seals seem to be spurious as well as many others. There are other brief inscriptions. This is by Yang Shiqi, who was a prime minister in the 15th century in the early Ming Dynasty, or it's attributed to him at least. This is Wu Quan, who's one of the great literary figures in Suzhou in the middle Ming Dynasty, and so on. So one of the interesting things is that there's a lot of spurious attachment to this painting in terms of seals and inscriptions and so on. And typically when one sees that, one expects that the painting itself would be still later than the spurious documentation. But in this case, the painting itself seems to have a certain quality, maybe not as early as the Li Tong or the Wu Yuanzhi or the authentic, what seem to be authentic 12th century works, however one might parse their actual identity. But certainly not, it doesn't seem so late as Wenjia's time in the 16th century or still later as one might expect. So one has to, I mean, the task of connoisseurship is not only to try to determine what a attribution isn't, but it should also include some plausible account of what it is or how it came to be in its current form. And that can be a tougher kind of narrative to reconstruct. But it may be that this painting was an early-ish painting, not as early as the 12th century, but according to some accounts, 14th century or so, Yuan or early Ming in dynasty, that in date, that was assigned to this recorded but otherwise unknown earlier artist by some later owner. It has a signature, but the signature is only partially legible. But it's close enough to support a plausible attribution to this otherwise unknown painter named Yang Shiqian. And then at some point it acquired this apparatus of seals and inscriptions and so on that tried to support its attribution to this more prestigious earlier era of the 12th century Sung dynasty. At any rate, that's one way of accounting for all this complexity that involves both style and treatment and documentary textual material, either inscriptions or seals, as we've seen. Now, another summer activity for me was a kind of peripheral engagement with a very interesting loan show from the National Palace Museum in Taiwan that many of you are quite familiar with as in its venue here in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum, the Emperor's Treasures Show, which had indeed wonderful treasures of porcelain and enamels and many other kinds of media, including some very interesting and important early paintings. And I was asked to do the audio, or at least contribute to the audio guide for the show, which I've never actually heard myself, but I've heard that at least it was audible. And thank you. My brief moment of fame, public fame. And one of the paintings I was asked to comment on was this one. I'm sorry, this is the only image I have of it, and it's a kind of a little bit unfocused image that was provided to me. But it gives you a sense of it. You know, some of you may remember it from the exhibition, and it's attributed to a Yuan dynasty, or that is 14th century painter, late 13th, early 14th century in his years of activity, named Ren Fa. And as you see, basic subject matter is a figure seated overlooking a stream, playing a chin or zither underneath the trees, a kind of colorful blue and green landscape. So this is one that you know, has the prestige even greater than the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston of the National Palace Museum attached to it. It has inscriptions by the august the collector, connoisseur, the Qianlong Emperor on it, and so on. But it's a problematic attribution, and in the end I sort of declined to comment on this because I didn't really know how to talk about it, at least in terms of its purported attribution. Ren Fa is a known artist, of course, and he's famous primarily as a horse painting specialist. This is a famous example of his work, the lean and fat horse, and you can see he's a very skillful, both in terms of the drawing, quality of drawing, and the amplitude of the horses and so on. Not so much known as a landscape painter. And in fact, I think here's another just detail of one of his best regarded works. It's not, of course, that it would be impossible for him to do this kind of subject, which was, that is, the scholar by the stream. But I think it falls fairly comfortably into another category, another time period, of which this is a representative example. It's by a lesser-known Suzhou school painter from the late 16th century, as you can see. And I'm not specifically attributing it to this artist, but it's the kind of thing, in terms of its basic conformation, the figures on the flat ledge here underneath the trees, gazing up out over the water, and so on, and something about the treatment of the trees and so on. So this is kind of just a stylistic attribution, because we have, again, lots of relevant comparative material. And to do a really, you know, decisive job of reattribution would require much more. It would require taking close account of all of the apparatus of documentation, signatures and seals and so on, which include what I assume is a spurious signature of Ren Fa on this painting, and doing the kind of comparison, sort of, you know, component by component that Arnold spoke of, that is, the calligraphic comparisons, the seals and so on. Don't even have the adequate level of detail to accomplish that here, but it could of course, be done. Another interesting work in this exhibition, The Emperor's Treasures, also fell into this Yuan category, was this painting. Interesting for lots of reasons. Its subject matter, it's a kind of popular religious theme, the goddess Magu in a landscape, an anonymous work. And I should say, you know, that the whole process of negotiating loans and so on is a complicated one, and there's a kind of understated raising of the same issue of dating and so on in the fine catalog that accompanied the exhibition. If I might quote, it says, "The decorative effects of the painting more closely resemble the style of a slightly later period, that is, slightly later than the 14th century Yuan dynasty." And in this case, it's not, you might say that the reattribution doesn't in a way diminish the painting, but in fact it might in some ways kind of enhance its historical importance. At any rate, there are some qualities of the drawings of the figures in particular, certain kinds of stylization, archaism and so on, which are reminiscent of at least the environment of the famous late Ming figure painter Chen Hongshou. This is another work from the same Palace Museum collection, an album painting. And it gives you a sense of the, again, somewhat archaistic treatment of the drapery and the stylization of the face and so on. I'm afraid I don't have details close enough to show particular figures here, but there's something quite distinctive about their treatment that suggests, if not Chen Hongshou's own authorship, at least the environment close to him. I mean, he had other his own children and other artists of the time who imitated him in the early 17th century. His period of activity from until 1650s. And this is another work that might remind us a bit of some of these qualities, the stylization of the foliage and the trees and so on, that you see in both works as a way of thinking about ways of reattributing this painting to its proper place. And in this case, it's not just a later period, but in some ways, as I say, maybe a more interesting and important environment of possible production. Another work of great personal interest, I should say, and a very handsome work in this exhibition, is attributed to the famous landscape painter Wang Meng, who was the subject of my doctoral dissertation many, many years ago. And it's a very strong painting, some of you may remember it from the exhibition, and it has lots of the qualities that we associate with Wang Meng, especially the very dense texturing of rock surfaces and their kind of sculptural conformation and so on that we see exhibited, especially in this great cliff, the East Mountain, which is the subject of the painting. It's a fine work and a strong work. I'm not entirely convinced that it's by Wang Meng himself. It has an unusually early date for attributions to Wang Meng. I mean, it's not impossible by any means. It would be one of his youthful works if it were genuine. We don't have much from this period of the 1340s that is associated with him, but we have some other early work, including this very fine summer landscape in the Fear Gallery in Washington, which is dated mid-1350s, so reasonably close. And one can see many kind of structural similarities and even similarities to some degree in the treatment of the landscape forms, but also some distinctions, maybe in the treatment of the tree trunks and so on, the sort of breaking up of the big mountain form into smaller components and so on, sort of complexity of that. And I would say, and again, everything is up for argument and negotiation, but may belong more comfortably somewhere in a bit later period, maybe the early to mid-Ming sort of Suzhou school. You see this is a very handsome painting by Wan Zhengming, one of the great exemplars of that Wu school or Suzhou school from the late 1520s. And quite similar in many respects compositionally, the screen of trees in the foreground, this complex rock formation broken up into boulders and so on, the dense texturing, the shading even of some of the features. But anyway, I think certainly not an exact match, but the kind of thing that suggests again the potential environment in which we might attribute the painting. How am I doing on time?
Pass your time.
Past my time. Okay. Okay, I'll end my presentation there. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. I believe many of you are aware of this evening's opening of Wang Tiande's exhibition. And artist Wang Tiande, while he was preparing for this exhibition, he intended to have a dialogue with the late great collector from Shanghai. This is Wu Ban at age of 54, and that's his date. With this idea in mind, I thought I give my talk somewhat related to Wu Fan has become, I mean, this connoisseurship and collection has been a very hard study in recent years. As you can see here, from December 10th, 2015, earlier this year, in spring, Shanghai Museum organized an exhibition on Wu Fan's connoisseurship and collection. Earlier, the year before, Macau Art Museum also organized same topic exhibition by borrowing paintings or calligraphy and other materials, not just from Shanghai Museum, but also from the Paris Museum. And that's in the fall of 2014. Okay. Earlier that year, also during Asian Week, but New York City's Asian Week, I was invited to Brooklyn Museum to survey its Chinese painting collection. About, I'll say, close to 200 paintings. And I came across an album, actually it's just part of the album by a 17th century artist, Jiang Siji. Not very well known. In this album, there are 4 double leaves. Okay. This one with Wu Fan's title written in silkscript. The 3 perfection of filial son Jiang. Jiang is referring to the artist Jiang Siji. Here is the Wu Fan's annotation to Jiang Siji's life, dated 1929, when Wu Fan was at the age of 36, only 36. He acquired this album and liked it very much, wrote a piece, and the album was actually donated to the museum by a local collector. The album originally had about, I think, 14 double leaves, but now there are only 4 double leaves, meaning 10 double leaves are missing. But anyway, let's take a quick look of these 4 double leaves. The first one is a landscape in the style of Wang Dongwang. Second one, painting in the style of Tong, an artist, and also with a little bit influence of this Zhao Danian of Northern Song. Then to the left, there are 3 poems written by Jiang Siji. The third one, no, I believe this is the 4th one. No, sorry, the 3rd one. Also calligraphy, the 4th one. Okay, these are the 4 double leaves now in the collection of a Brooklyn Museum. In the curatorial file, this is the wooden cover came with the album. In the back, there is this label. Let's take a closer look. This label says, as you can see, I don't know if this gallery is still in existence, because this gotta be, well, it's gotta be in the 50s or so. But in any case, as you can see, 14 double leaves, dated the year 1700. As I mentioned earlier, the museum has 4 now, 10 missing. In the museum curatorial files, I thought it's very interesting because museum has this practice. When visitors, scholars visit museum, viewing paintings, they make comments, curators would jot it down and put it in the file. As we can see, on February 14, 1986, Fu Sen, my predecessor at Freer Gallery, made a comment. Very good, especially clean. Fu Sen is well known in our field. In the 70s, in the 76, I believe, 40 years ago, he wrote a book, Studies in Connoisseurship. A very big one. Okay. 89, May 3rd, Lawrence Wu, assistant to the late dealer connoisseur Bob Ellsworth. Lawrence Wu. He made a comment, work is good, but by a less important artist, 17th century. And he also know this work was in Wu Bufan's collection, and he mentioned there's an album, or yeah, another album at the Yale University Art Gallery collection. The third one, in 1994, March 3rd, Pelus, and I believe many of you know him, a New York collector. He made a comment, painting and calligraphy are stuffed and lifeless. So he has a different opinion. As you can see, 3 comments are not exactly the same. Okay. I mentioned that 2014, Macau Art Museum organized this exhibition on Wu Bufan. I was invited to the symposium, so I was preparing for my talking. I came across this album in the Shanghai Museum. Interestingly, 14 double leaves. And this one is identical. But as you can see from the old publication, the image shows only the painting and calligraphy. There is nothing around the border, mounting. But when I went to the museum, when I saw the actual piece, surprisingly, this is the blueprint, the one below blueprint, the one above at the Shanghai Museum. But in the Macau Art Museum, when I saw the original, I saw this with a comment written to the left by Wu Bufan. Very interesting. This comment he wrote dated 1945. And remember, the colophon he wrote for Brooklyn, that was 1921. So it's been 16 years apart. In his comment, he said, about 20 years ago, I acquired an album of Jiang Sijie, but now Ye Gongchuo, another famous collector connoisseur, gave me this album, and I studied seriously and realized what I had before was a forgery. So that's his comment. Now, let's take a look. The one on the right at Brooklyn, the one on the left, Shanghai Museum, how close they are. Even this missing character, whoever forged this piece paid attention to such detail. And they are extremely close. Well, the common sense of making forgery is to make some profit, right? But who would spend that kind of time and effort to forge 14 double leaves by a less known artist, Jiang Sijie? Maybe many of you never heard of. So what was the purpose to make a copy? And I was puzzled by this question until a few days ago when I was preparing for this presentation. I came across a memoir by Chen Julai, a very famous collector in Shanghai, who carved seals for 心于吴不凡、张大千. In his memoir, he said that when Zhang Dajian first arrived in Shanghai in the 20s, among his favorite artists to forge, like Shi Tao, Bada, Hun Cai, in addition to these artists, he also forged Jiang Shiji. So now we find a very good candidate for this who forged this. But there are still 10 double leaves out there, one day floating. So be careful. Okay. Speaking of who would forge a lesser known artist, this one is not forgery. This is a genuine one, a hand scroll with 2 sections, 2 paintings by lesser known 14th century artist by the name Zhao Yuan and Shen Sichong. Okay. Now we want to deal with a very well-known workshop, Tanjing, in Shanghai. Between 1947 and 1949. Within that 2 years, he formed a workshop by assembling the best painter, calligrapher, seal carver. His workshop created probably a couple dozen of classical paintings, and some of them are now in American museums. This is a section from Metropolitan's hand scroll, Zhao Yuan. In 2008, Christie's Hong Kong present 9 works from Tanjing's workshop, and this is one of them, Zhao Yuan. So you have these 2 to compare. Let's take a look at the details. Now, the second painting by Shen Sichong, this is also the one at the Met, and where is the one created by Tanjing's workshop? It's very close, nearby, it's enormous. And this is the lower part is the from the Tanjing workshop. Again, take a look at the details and see how close they are, including seals, brushwork. Of course, seals not exactly identical, meaning the original one has 2 more than the one which now is. Okay, that's about painting. Wu Bufan student, C.C. Wang, I think everybody knows him. In the 80s, I think it was 1986, he brought a hand scroll by Shi Tao, Peach Blossom Spring to the Flair. Wanted to sell it to Fu Sen. But Fu Sen said, we have the original here. These 2, I'm not going to tell you which is which, but you can have your vote in mind. Remember, the one on the left or the one on the right. This is the hand scroll divided into 3 sections. Now I'm showing the one on the right. Now, the middle section. Here's the inscription by Tong. When C.C. Wang realized the friar has the original, he kindly donated the piece to the friar. So the friar has both now. Okay. I think 20 years ago, when I was invited to apply for the job, and my colleague, Stephen Ali, many of you know him, he was also the assistant professor. He brought me to the storage, saying that one great aspect of the Friar collection is that not only we collect, original, genuine, we also collect fakes. But it's for study, and it's very interesting. So I want to show you something. So he brought 2 scrolls. We back to the opening section. Not characteristically my style, but I want the job very much. So I decided to show off a little bit. Before he unrolled the entire scroll, while he was just open the beginning section, I stopped him there. I said, well, there's no need to unfold the whole painting. I'll just take a look at the big seal in the beginning section, and I'll tell you which is the original and which one is the forgery. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Here's the seal. This is the one on the left. That's the one on the right. So from these 2 seals, one is original, one is the impression is made by the zinc plate. So I told him which is which, and I guess that's one of the reasons I got the job. Well, by presenting these 3 cases on calligraphy, painting, seal, I intend to illustrate that when we look at painting, sometimes we're not sure. Then we can look at the figures. And we're still not sure. We can look at the seal. Each is a tool to solve the problem of connoisseurship, or to be helpful in authenticating paintings. The more tools one has, the better, the easier to solve the mystery, to tell the right from wrong. Thank you.